when we're creating stuff for Coriolis, The Third Horizon, we always say, this is Arabian Nights in Space. Right? Free League have always said this from the outset. That's the hook. It's what gets people excited. Everyone goes, oh, great, Arabian Nights in Space. But what does that actually mean? And why are we doing it? Right? Who cares if it's Arabian Nights in Space? And there are plenty of people who publish materials who make grand claims that sound fantastic and they never follow through on them. Right? You'll probably find tons of Kickstarters where somebody has a wonderful sounding hook and actually then the content is just generic. So given that a lot of people seem happy with something that sounds superficially exciting but is actually pretty generic, why do we put the effort into making something Arabian Nights in Space? What the hell does that mean and what are we trying to achieve by it? Now, allow me to be theoretical for a moment, and then I'll give you concrete examples of how we create an Arabian Nights in Space vibe. The theoretical part is this. When we create role-playing experiences for our players, we talk about role-playing games, and we pick up the books of our bookshelves and go, here, look, it's a role-playing game. No, it's not. That's not a role-playing game. Right? This, not a role-playing game. This, even this, not a role-playing game. I could get all the books off my shelf over there. None of them are actually role-playing games. So the role-playing game rules, but you don't get a role-playing game until you bring it to the table, you get people to interact, and the players start engaging with the world and the story and the material, and they create something. The GM and the players create the role-playing game. And the reason that we are creating an Arabian Nights in Space vibe is to make that experience as memorable and exciting, as inspiring as possible for the players and for the GM. It's not just a theoretical, hypothetical kind of, ooh, let's create a pretty thing which sits on a shelf. We want players to really get into this and get something really special out of it as an experience. This is actually more difficult than it sounds, because the process by which we bring material to the table tends to make our role-playing games a bit bland and samey. It all just gets a bit beige. We tend towards the average. There's a regression to the mean. So let me explain how this works. We start with something that's really exciting and fresh and new, right? We start with this. And somebody has created this thing, this set of ideas, this wonderful fusion of their own experiences, their own ideas, what they've read, with the things they see around them in the world, the sci-fi they've viewed and so forth, right? The movies they've watched. They create this wonderful thing. We look at it and we say, that's great. But then we go, there isn't enough there. That's just a rule book. Give me campaigns, give me adventures. And when we look at this, we're not here. We're not with that person writing that book with their own experiences and ideas. We bring our ideas and our experiences. And most of us, when we're thinking sci-fi, we bring to this material a load of reference points. We bring Andor, we bring Farscape, we bring The Expanse, we bring Star Trek, we bring Alien, Blade Runner, Firefly, and so on, right? And these are all brilliant things. But if you think of somebody in creating materials for this, maybe creating a campaign, this wonderful fresh vision starts moving towards what we're already familiar with. And then that supplement that's been created, maybe by somebody like me writing a scenario, maybe by somebody homebrewing something, that started to move towards the beige, but then they interpret that in terms of what they already know, which is going to be Farscape, Firefly, Star Wars, etc. Right? And it moves further towards the average, and then they bring it to the table. And if they haven't got a clear idea what they're trying to create, then the players have those same ideas and those assumptions and those experiences of media, and they start pulling it towards that average. And we end up with something that is really fresh in the book, but we just bring it towards our own expectations and assumptions and the media that we're comfortable with. And we lose that sense of wonder and amazingness that we might get if we read, for example, the faction descriptions in the Coriolis Third Horizon rulebook, right? So when we say Arabian Nights in Space, this isn't just, oh, the characters will be wearing some Arabian-ish fancy dress. It means we're keeping a focus on a goal. We are trying to create an Arabian Nights in Space experience. Now, to do that, we have to define what we think makes Arabian Nights in Space. And I would argue that that means primarily a sense of wonder and discovery. If you read the 1001 Nights, or you read other literature from the Arabic Middle Ages or from Persia or whatever, you might be with the great Captain Sinbad sailing off into unknown waters, about to discover giants and huge birds and glittering treasures, and it'll be amazing. Or you might be an unnamed peddler about to wander down the wrong alleyway and stumble into something very weird and surprising and a strange set of women who are running a household that doesn't make sense. Right? It can be epic, it can be really earthy, but it's always got wonder and discovery. We know that the vibe is pre-modern. This isn't bureaucratic, this isn't democratic, it's not post-industrial. We have industrial stuff, but we want the vibe to stay pre-modern. And the other thing that we want to do is we want to fuse science, the supernatural, and the spiritual. And if we look at the 1001 Nights, for example, the Arabian Nights stories, these have been created by a culture, or have been collected and written down in a culture, which was pushing science forward really hard. Right? Architecture, mathematics, optics, chemistry, and so forth, and yet was deeply religious and had a profound sense that the supernatural was just around the corner all the time. So we want to keep that. And that gives us a set of goals: wonder and discovery, a pre-modern vibe, and fusing science, the supernatural, and the spiritual. Of course, there's an aesthetic to this as well, clothes that are likely to be worn and so forth. But those ideas and those experiences are what we're aiming for. Those are our North Star. When we sit there and go, well, the rules give us this crazy, wonderful thing, but our assumptions are all a little bit more 21st century television, we need Arabian Nights in Space to find in our heads what we're trying to achieve so that we can keep the experience over here with the wonderful, original, fresh stuff that we find in the Third Horizon rulebook. So as we start building out experiences, our starting point is not Arabian Nights stories. Our starting point is this, right? Our starting point is the faction descriptions and the information about the star systems and the stuff we find in the community atlas and so forth, right? We start from that. But as we start thinking through the implications of this wonderful world that Free League have laid out for us in the Coriolis rulebook, and then was developed in things like the community atlas, we keep in mind this Arabian Nights in Space North Star: wonder, discovery, pre-modern vibes, science, supernatural, and spiritual all melding together. But then we get stuck, because what's in our heads is Blade Runner, Star Wars, Star Trek, The Mandalorian, The Expanse, etc. And we find ourselves being suckered into coming back to what's familiar to us and what's familiar to our players. And the players won't really mind because they'll understand what's going on, but it's not exciting and it's not special. So when we get stuck, when we find ourselves veering towards the predictable, that's the point at which we can say, let's find a genuine source, something from medieval Persia, from the Golden Age of Baghdad, from Arabic folklore, something like that, where we inject fresh ideas into our own heads when we're writing this stuff down. Now, as a GM just running stuff once a week, it's kind of hard to do that, but as I've got the time to sit down and actually write supplements, fortunately I do have the time to do this, and I'll give you a couple of examples of ways that I've made this work. Both of these examples are from the Blood Tree, which at the time I'm recording this is our current Kickstarter for Coriolis. It's a double book pack of the Blood Tree and Across the Horizon. But I'll give you a couple of examples of specific problems that I faced writing the Blood Tree, where I realised I was kind of getting stuck and starting to go a little bit beige and go a little bit obvious. And I used weird primary sources and original medieval ideas to pull me back to something that was more Arabian Nights in Space. So 2 examples. First one, we've got a petty gangster. He runs a little patch of the city. He wants to expand. He wants to take over a whole district. He kind of needs the approval of the syndicate for this. He's just petty. He's below their notice. But if he's going to expand, they're going to notice him. He needs them to buy in. And so part of the plot is him and his competitor, and she's trying to do the same thing, trying to become the dominant force in organised crime in the conglomerate. That's starting to sound like a 1970s gangster movie. That's not sounding Arabian Nights in Space. So we need to start building it up, first with reference to the rulebook and the materials that we have in the community atlas and so forth, right? We can make it a real part of the setting, but we also need to add details which feel Arabian Nights in Space. So, for example, how does this gangster control his mooks, his gang members? How does he motivate them? Well, the 1970s gangster movie is, he's completely unforgiving with traitors and he's really brutal and there's probably a horse's head in someone's bed, people get assassinated and whatever. Or we can go, well, it's science fiction, so we think it's science. What would normally happen in science? Something like Andor or Firefly, what would they do? Oh, maybe it's a serum. Maybe there's a science solution here that he's using some sort of chemical to keep them loyal. Well, yes, but what's the Arabian Nights in Space version? And so, for example, we look back at some of the stuff that was written in the Middle Ages about a organisation that was alleged to exist. Medieval writers wrote about this called the Banu Sasan. Now, if we're modern fantasy role-playing game players, we understand the idea of a thieves' guild. To a medieval Arabic audience, the Banu Sasan were the equivalent. Not so much a thieves' guild as a charlatans' guild, an organisation of confidence tricksters and thieves and general scumbags and scoundrels. But the writings we have from the Middle Ages give us specific examples of scams that the Banu Sasan allegedly ran. We can use that for role-playing games. So what I did in this case was I had the gangster have a kind of pet charlatan who was bedazzling and beguiling his gangsters with fake promises of spiritual insight and supernatural ability. Now, immediately that's fresher and it's more interesting. It's also something we can build plots around, because now our player characters, rather than going, oh, well, the gangster's really ruthless and he scares his mooks into submission, the player characters can go, oh, we've discovered how he's keeping control of his people. Maybe we can expose it. Maybe we can talk to the charlatan and flip her so that she betrays her boss. Right? We can actually build more interesting plots as well as more evocative plots. As another example, we have an assassin. The player characters are racing to try and work out what she's planning, where she's going to strike. Now, how do we get a clue to them about where the assassination is going to take place? Well, the usual way of doing that would be data, they find a witness, there's an unreliable confidant who spills the beans, there's a note on a piece of paper that she's left. We've all seen those kind of spy movies, those kind of assassin plots, and we default to that. But what's the Arabian Nights in Space version? And in this case, I was remembering a book called The Book of Idols, which was written 1500 years ago, which was supposed to be about how people in pre-Islamic Arabia related to their deities. And it has a wonderful sequence in it about lot casting and how lots were cast in medieval Arabia. So now the clue is they find that she's been going to a lot caster, and they get to the lot caster and the lot caster is really upset because this woman came and there was something that she wanted to do at midday today, but the lots came up telling her that she shouldn't do it, and she got really angry and said, well, to hell with the icons, I'm going to do this anyway. And this is now telling us something about that character's personality, her relationship with the divine, and it's built on a genuine historical source. This is way more interesting than, well, how do we normally get clues about assassinations in role-playing games? Let's wheel out one of those. Because we've gone back to an original source, it pushes us into creating something that's more original and that says more about the character, and the players can now start unravelling the mystery from the point of view of this world, not our cliches. So, there was a theoretical bit there and then two specific examples, so thank you for staying with me through this. But the point is, if we are creating an Arabian Nights in Space vibe, we need to understand what that is. And we need to keep it in mind as our North Star, the thing that we're constantly orienting ourselves on. And we need to be using it proactively, dragging ourselves back to it to make sure that we're creating the most exciting, engaging, wondrous experiences that we can for our players. Now, if you've heard all that, and if you've heard that while the Kickstarter is in progress for the Blood Tree, then go to Kickstarter and back the Blood Tree, right? Because there's loads more of this kind of stuff in the Blood Tree and you and your players will love it. Obviously, I'm going to say that. I'm also hoping if you're a Coriolis GM, whenever you're watching this, this is good food for thought for you. And you can think, okay, now I can use this to create a more Arabian Nights in Space vibe for my players.